Hey, how you doing? Oh, I think you're still on mute,
And that is why we tech test before people arrive.
but of course.
No, I am well. I am excited to take a very long nap after this.
I'm sure.
Um, I I am I know Doran's coming. I think my partner is coming on her phone. I don't know, and Ayushi, but I don't know who else. So,
Hopefully we'll get some turnout. Usually, Scott from my pop culture class, one of our MA students, he usually
oh
pops in,
yeah.
and I'm pretty sure I posted it in my class announcements.
It's so I like can't possibly blame anyone for being like too tired or too busy though. So I just making an edit.
Hello, Ayushi.
Hello, how are you both?
Doing okay.
Good.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I just got home 15 minutes ago from teaching, so I'm glad the Friday is coming to an end after this. So,
I was talking with Rania earlier, and you know how when you're going through it, you don't really think about what the day was like or what it's like. So I shared with her the day yesterday, which you both are familiar with. She was like, "That's a lot." Like, yes, it is. I didn't think about it, but I think that's what we're all living through is like having a lot to do and navigate, and you just kind of rest after it's done.
yeah.
Yeah.
My wife will often ask, "What do you have going on?" I'm like, "I'm trying not to think about it because if I do, I might go into a little paralysis and just get nothing
I have a serious thing about like do not if I sit down, it's all over. Like if I lose inertia,
done."
it's too late for me. uh
Sometimes I have to take what I call a depression nap in the middle of the day. And
mhm.
the first time I said it to my husband, he was like, "Are you okay?" And it's like, "No, I'm okay. I just need to do this for my mental health." Um, And so when I can, it's not a possibility when I'm teaching on campus, but if I'm teaching remotely, if I have an hour between things in the afternoon, I try to shut down for like 40 minutes if I can. Um, but otherwise, my brain will not function. I don't know what happened. I think this is a result of the pandemic because before that, I remember being on campus for 16 hours at a time and like just go, go, go. And now, if you tell me I have to be on campus for 6 hours, I start feeling it in my soul. So
Mhm.
it's
No,
very
you're
different.
absolutely right. The pandemic has changed how we experience things. Just, I
Yeah.
mean, after I got off the call with you both yesterday, I think I had about 10 minutes in between before the proposed defense. And I moved out of this chair for those 10 minutes. I tried to make sure I didn't fall asleep, but just tried to, like you said, take a depression exit for a moment. But like you said, I was thinking about that. Like we used to be on campus from 9 to 5 or 6 in the evening, or later if you had a lady
Or
class.
10 p.m. if you were teaching that 6 to
Right.
10 slot or taking classes. So I don't know
Yeah.
how we did it. I don't know.
I'm glad that we don't anymore. I like truly I used to be someone who would also be, on campus at I used to teach 8 a.m.s. I would get to campus at like 7:30, probably a little closer to 7:15, but then I would be there until like 9 or 10, you know, because
Yeah.
there's no point in going home if you're done teaching at like 2 o'clock and then you have class at 4.
Yeah.
So then just it turns into such a slog. But I'm happy with culture slowing down a little bit.
You
I
know, that
won't
maybe this
complain
is
about
something
that.
for future work. I think part of it was we also, to end what you were saying earlier, like to fight the inertia, we also use the momentum of one another, like the interactions, the exchanges, the movements across campus, having to get out of our office to go to another department or something of that nature. You know, I think it was things of that nature that also contributed us to being able to navigate like that and do it. Whereas now, like I was just explaining to my son, like after I go and do a little workout in the morning or something, I'll go to my office for a few hours and I'll be there. But if I don't, I'm here in this chair for 3 to 4 hours before picking them up and things. It's just like it creates a different experience.
Yeah. Yeah. The social, yeah, I kind of forget that sociality plays a huge role in sort of mood and I guess, yeah, that affective ability to move through the day. Like we are energetic beings and we are giving and we are taking energy all the time too.
Yeah.
We're like plants.
Man, people talk about affect theory as if it's so like hippy dippy crunchy stuff, but I'm like, it is literally so like relevant and tangential to physics.
Very
I'm going to
interesting
move
thing.
myself inside. Oh, I think my partner is calling in
Dorn,
from her phone upstairs.
if either of you have Dorn's like number or email, he joined the old link for Dr. Sharp's presentation. So he's in the
Oh,
wrong link.
I can send him that right now. Hopefully it's only Doran who's having that issue.
Yeah. I'm keeping an eye on my email, so it lets me know if somebody joins a different link on my Zoom or any Zoom document.
Yeah, he just sassily texted me a picture of the Zoom and said, when you show up before the presenter. What brilliant timing. I was just roasting you.
Hopefully I didn't send out the wrong Zoom link. I double checked. Did I send out the wrong one?
Yep.
No,
I'm
I don't
very
think
sorry.
you
I don't know. I clicked on the Zoom link that was in the email today, so it took me to the wrong room.
There was an
Well,
email today that went out.
Yeah. Or I guess
is
when
it a
was it?
reminder?
I sent out a reminder today. Did
Yeah,
I put the
and
wrong email? I
you
will
did.
resend the. I double checked on the thing. I must have copy pasted.
I can join on my phone and start yelling at people who are in that room and pretend
I,
like
I
I
was
didn't
gonna
make
open
that
an
mistake.
incognito window and just be like, "Hey, move over here."
I am going to grab one thing real quick and we'll give folks, I guess, another second. But if it's really just the 4 of you all, what a perfect audience for me.
I don't know. I've been pre-roasted here, so I may have some like scathing, fatally
no.
critical arguments.
It is the wrong link in the flyer. I didn't even catch that.
That's
I'm
totally
gonna
fine.
resend the email with the correct link, and that way I'll
Right.
catch everyone who I emailed this morning.
And I'm keeping an eye, like I said, I'm keeping an eye on my email, so it'll let me know anybody that joins that Zoom. Matter of fact, what I might do is just join there and have it running in the background.
It's a shame you can't just merge meetings. It's like just funnel everyone into a single meeting.
That is a good idea. We may need to send that to Zoom.
And they'll be like, why don't you just send the right Zoom link to begin with? And we respond because we're academics and Zoom links, they're not our friend.
Also, there's like a million Zoom links we all have for everything.
Right.
So the merge would, it's like Survivor. We should be doing this.
I totally accidentally almost just tried to open the Sims on my laptop. Can someone say something for me so I can just make sure my headphones are working?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear?
Thanks, Dr. Craig. You're so reliable.
All right, so I have that other one running in the background just in case anybody pops in there.
And I sent the correct email or the correct link via email. So hopefully we'll catch anyone that's going to the
We're almost through finals, guys.
Maybe another minute or two, Em, and then we'll just go ahead and get started.
Yeah. I'm just gonna go ahead, make sure everything looks good. Can you all see my slides
Yes, we can.
and nothing else?
Sure.
Like not
Change
speaker
a slide.
notes?
So go to the next slide. Okay, yes, we only see your slides.
Awesome, fantastic.
So your slides match your shirt, which is very cool.
I
don't know if that
actually
was
didn't even
intentional.
think that. Yeah, no, I was just like, oh, this is a fun shirt. It's Friday. It kind of
And Emma,
gives me Scooby-Doo vibes.
I was gonna ask you, is that like profiles of faces making?
Yeah, their profiles are just like human face profiles, and I don't think it's for anything specifically. I know this like company of clothes specifically designs like androgynous clothing. So I feel like by design we're not supposed to know. But I always think of Scooby-Doo every time I see it. So I thought it'd be perfect for the pop culture lab. It was either that or the Avatar shirt. So, but that one has a hole in it now. So I feel like that's less cool.
And we are so informal with each other. We didn't even think to. Do you want an intro from Ayushi or myself, or do you just want to take it right away?
I can totally take it right away. Hello, favorite audience. This is a wonderful way to end our Pop Ideas Lab for the speaker series for our first year. Shout out to Dr. Craig and Ayushi, aka Dr. Hingle, for seriously putting in the hours to make the lab happen this year. It's really come from like vision to reality, and that's been really exciting to see. Also, hello to Doran, who I play video games with, and to Mac, who I also play video games with. It's just a perfect, like, truly ideal audience. So today I am going to be presenting this project that has kind of been the culmination of a directed reading I've been doing with Dr. Craig, kind of looking at issues around pop culture and climate change and where there's overlap and what discussions are being had and what the space of pop culture offers us for ideas on how to navigate pop culture, ideas on how we're navigating climate change, sorry, ideas on how we're navigating climate change, ideas on how we might be navigating climate change, etc. So this is what I came up with, and it's called From Save Scumming to Saving the World, the potential of video games in self-efficacy development and climate problem solving. So I'm going to start with the big question that everyone I've read this title to has asked me, and that is, what is save scumming? Kind of sounds like a bad word. Save scumming is the act of saving before key decisions or expected key decisions take place in a game. So think right before you go into that boss battle, right before you enter the dungeon, you've got all your good loot, you've been working so hard. You don't want to go in there without saving, because what if what if the boss bests you, right? You don't want to take that risk. So the act of save scumming is, in my opinion, being precautionary. In others' opinion, being afraid to take a risk. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how I got to this, because as Dr. Craig and Dora, frankly, all of you, as painfully aware as you must be by now, that I think in rabbit holes. And I think not just in rabbit holes, but I think in a network of rabbit holes. So I figured I'd give you some understanding into how I even got here. Hi, my gamer tag is Prof Smalls. That came from a nickname some friends gave me because I'm the one who decided to go into higher ed. In real life, I'm 28. I am a second-year PhD student at George Mason, studying climate communication, culture, and media. I am a deeply climate anxious person, and I'm neurodiverse. So I have ADHD and I have autism, and I'm a gamer, and I always have been. Some of my favorite games, reaching back across history, my history for me, Baldur's Gate 3, Overwatch, The Last of Us series, the Kingdom Hearts series, and good old-fashioned RuneScape, which, if you don't know what that is, it is the less cool version of World of Warcraft. For those of us who didn't have the internet bandwidth back in the earlier 2000s to have such a thing like World of Warcraft. My favorite console of all time is my PlayStation 2, RIP, wherever you are. And my current console, which is a PlayStation 5. I aspire to one day have a computer gaming system too, but one thing at a time. In video games, my strengths, I'm versatile. You can put me in a sports game, you can put me in a combat game, you can put me in an open world game, and I'll figure it out. I will, if we're playing together, I will try and heal you, okay? I am totally fine if you want to save scum. We can save. If we're not going to win the battle, I'm fine if we don't. Oh, my face is frozen again. Fixing that. My weaknesses, though, I will probably die trying to save you. I will get too attached to my characters. I'm not above yelling at the 10-year-old kid who's somewhere in Kansas yelling at me online. And I sometimes get overwhelmed by open world games and I have to put it down for a while. So why I came to video games as an interesting communication space, the community aspect. One, I have met so many people online through video games like RuneScape, Overwatch, Rocket League, etc., from around the world, had really interesting conversations. And it's a different kind of space because it's accessible in a lot of ways for folks who can't necessarily get places in the physical world. I play video games as an escape. I love school. I mean, clearly I'm mixing my love of video games and my love of school. But sometimes I just want to, put the keyboard down and pick up the controller and not be thinking about high theory and just, go find some loot boxes somewhere. From real world stressors, not just at the individual level, but also at the societal level. The world's a heavy place right now, no doubt. It's tough to cope with sometimes, and there's not a lot I can do about it. So video games offer an escape from engaging with that 24/7. And it's also not just about escaping from, but escaping to, and that's to a world that I can impact, and I can have, you know, tangential, or sorry, not tangential, but that too, tangible outcomes, right? I can engage, I can make a difference, I help make decisions about if characters live or die, or what story arcs I might engage with. So there's a sense of autonomy that is not necessarily similar to that in the real world. And then I love a good challenge, right? You know, different worlds, different problems to solve, they take different kinds of approaches, cognitively speaking. It really offers you an opportunity to get good at not just critical thinking, but hand-eye and motor skill control. But this isn't just about me. I wanted to also ask you all in the audience, if any of you are also gamers, which I know for a fact at least two of you are, but why do you guys game if you do? Or if you don't, tell me why. And what are some things that draw you to gaming, just out of curiosity?
I don't know if I consider myself a gamer, but I enjoy an occasional video game. I got my PS4 system. So I enjoy, usually I like playing sports games, especially like the Madden. Especially if my team is losing or is having a bad season, I like to see them win. So I'll put it on rookie and just beat the heck out of whatever team I'm going up against. But sometimes I like to enjoy playing something like the Spider-Man game, just like to see how they're creating the puzzle and the adventure and the little storylines and narratives.
Oh yeah, the Spider-Man games. I haven't played the second one, but I have the first and I really enjoyed it.
I still haven't opened my Miles Morales one. I'm saving that for like
Yep.
accomplishment.
I'm like, that's a after this week is over venture. And by this week, I mean abstract finals week. But Ayushi, Doran, I know you guys dabble here and there. Or Ayushi, do you game?
I don't know if I'd label myself a gamer. I feel like my brother would be like, "What's happening? Since when is this true?" But I do game every now and then. I think I'm more of like the fighting games. Tekken 3
Oh
is a
yeah.
game that I have mastered, and if anyone ever wants to play that, I will play that. Crash Bandicoot, I've played all of the Crash Bandicoot games.
Classic.
That was some of my favorite. Those are some of my favorite games. And then right now, I think Animal Crossing is where I go to kind of escape because I can pay off my debts in Animal Crossing so much faster than in real life, and it makes me feel accomplished. I said that, and my cat Link was like, "Yes," he let me out in the back, because he's
Yeah.
on those adventures with me. So, I don't know if I'd label myself a gamer just because I don't want to make anyone who is actually gaming feel like I'm just jumping on the bandwagon, but I do enjoy games. I enjoy watching a lot because then I can follow the story and not feel responsible for the character. So that's my problem. I feel too responsible.
That's very real. Doran, jump on in.
I mean, I think it's intriguing. I go back and forth on whether or not I'm a real gamer or not. But definitely community. I think it's really remarkable how video games can collapse distance. And I hadn't played video games much for years until I started the PhD program and started playing video games with my brothers every single week. Once Tuesday evenings, we'll sit and play video games together and use it as a way to stay in contact. And then definitely escape. Like I have a long history of starting a civilization games shortly after finals and getting to the point where my armies of tanks can crush the other civilizations. And it's like I'll play it through and it's like the stress of finals becomes, world domination. It's a nice blow off valve. But yeah, I think it's really fascinating why we play games and the way that games can create alternative venues for us to communicate with one another.
Yeah, one can picture you playing Civilization very vividly, and just, yeah, leading those tanks in. But yeah, the aspect of community, and it gives us a place when things feel out of our control to seize control, right? Or to Ayushi, decide what level of control or participation we want to have, even the act of watching, right? I know in high school, my friends and I used to pick a game for the winter break, and we did a lot of the Super Mario games, Mario Galaxy, and one of our friends just she wasn't as good at playing, but she got so much joy out of telling us what to do or helping us like see threats that we couldn't see because we were too busy, you know, participating directly with our characters. And it was just a really fun way to solidify and to enhance our community experience too. And to the, you know, extent of collapsing distance, I think that's also a really important point, Doran, because I mean, a lot of folks in the program know, but like I have moved 2 hours away from school, so I don't get to see my school friends as much. But Doran and I frequently will talk about research while we run around of zombies online. And it's a great way for us to de-stress, but it's also like reduces the distance I feel, you know. I love being in Charlottesville again. I get so much joy out of where I am, but it is a barrier to, you know, getting to hang out with friends sometimes, right? So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of get a sense because, again, all of the things that are driving me to play games in many ways are the things driving other folks to play games. And I just couldn't help myself. I had to like mess around with my phone this morning to see if I could take a picture with a cell phone of my TV, but I booted up my game so I could show you guys my character in BG3 right now, one of 4 characters I have right now. His name is Elios. He is a tiefling monk. I am learning all about stats regulation through different classes. It's a very interesting game. And the other side note I'll just throw in there because that you all had such great and interesting points is the identity of a gamer. I think there's a communication project or a conversation to be had there because I would say Dr. Craig, Ayushi, and Doran, you guys saying you don't qualify as gamers. I've heard Max say that she doesn't feel she qualifies as a gamer, but guess what? Yeah, if you're playing a game, I strongly think that's a case for you to qualify as a gamer. So, I mean, if we want to bring in the capital G versus lowercase g thing, I'm fine with that. But a gamer is a gamer is a gamer, guys. So, shockingly, I'm going to talk very briefly, but give you a sense of video gaming and like what is it and why is it important and why have I chosen this over, say, watching TV or watching movies. To give you a little bit of the farther back history of video games, they had humble beginnings back when computers were the size of rooms and not the size of books, right? In 1958, the first set of computer scientists were really trying to stoke public engagement and public interest with these emerging technologies. And so the first 2 video games were tic-tac-toe and a game called Tennis for Two, designed by computer scientist William Higginbotham. And I can show you the picture down here. Sorry, it's a little bit small. But they would start by having people come in and engage with the game. And not only was that to stoke interest in funding these projects, but also to get people excited about the promise of computers, right? And this is also kind of a reactionary situation because there's a lot of anxiety about the future that computers are going to bring and what it means to be in a world with computers that are starting to operate at these levels. So why not make it fun, right? I'll give you a little image. This is what Tennis for Two was. Really not that exciting comparatively. It's not your, you know, Super Mario. It's not your Crash Bandicoot, but you know, that's where we started from. Gotta know your roots, right? And from there, computer science became a lot more integrated into academics. It became a lot more widespread in terms of public funding, etc. And people caught on. They're like, hey, this idea of a computer game is actually quite fun, right? And so 1972, Pong machine. It's an arcade machine. It's a big box machine, but it debuts in California. And a few days into it being in this arcade, the story goes, the person one of the arcade owners had to call to have the machine serviced by Atari, because it wasn't working anymore. And when the service provider came to fix the machine, they realized that the problem was it had been too stuffed full of money. So suddenly this, Pong makes a public debut, and it just completely grips the youth, right? Like, people, younger folks, older folks, everyone is going to the arcade because this game Pong seems so exciting and they want to turn. And it really did start to change the way that social spaces were able to integrate video games, how video games were community gathering activities, etc. And so from there, that same year that the Pong machine came out, the first home console was created, the Magnavox Odyssey. And they were very deeply interested in having an at-home version of Pong. Atari partnered with Sears that same year, though, after seeing the success of the arcade machine, and they were like, we're going to do this right. So Atari releases the home Pong system in 1975. It's actually very small comparatively to the machine it took to run, Tennis for Two. So this was very impressive technological feat at the time as well. But Atari kind of launches into its, more reputable now fame because of its home Pong release. In 1985, the first Nintendo console was released, giving us games like the classic Super Mario Brothers, etc. 1989 saw the release of the Sega Genesis, which was an incredibly popular console, but also the still beloved Nintendo Game Boy. That was also my first hand console as a kid. And then the 90s really brought us into what I would say is the modern generation of video game consoles, with the Super Nintendo being released in 1991. 1995, that was a great year, not that I'm biased, but Sony PlayStation releases their first console, first iteration of that console. We're now at 5, rumored to be headed towards 6 sooner rather than later. And then 1999, the Sega Dreamcast, which is still also a weirdly cult niche popular system. But I think it's important to see how not only did we have, it wasn't just one console, but it expanded into a network of consoles. And this creates audiences. This creates networks of folks playing certain kinds of games, etc. Even now, even though most of our consoles are distilled into PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo, and computer console gaming, it definitely says something about you, colloquially speaking, in the gaming community. If you're a PlayStation person, or if you're a Nintendo person, or if you're an Xbox person. Are we starting to collapse those worlds? I would say yes, but furthermore, it's important, and it's kind of expanded into our communication and public infrastructure. So today, we've seen us go from that, we're going to have Pong in the arcade and we're going to go somewhere, to now this is a huge multi-billion-dollar global industry, impacting almost every single sector of industry that we have. So economically speaking, annually, video gaming brings $328.6 billion to the United States economy, and gives the United States over $700,000 jobs. And it provides 1.8 million jobs around the world. When we talk about it from a cultural impact, sort of just speaking to a couple tangentials. One, we have seen the rise of the competitive esports arena, which is seeing viewership similar to that of real life sports. And It's offering a virtual space for connection. And again, whether you are someone who likes to watch streaming or you're someone who likes to actively play these games, more and more people are able to be connected in these spaces, also with the differing and diversifying types of games and ways to participate in those gaming experiences. More folks with disabilities are able to access and play these spaces as well. Very notably, I want to speak to the health and education impacts, because I think video games growing up had a hugely negative air about them. At least my parents were always like, oh, video games are going to rot your brain. I mean, they are the ones who bought me the systems, but like, let's talk about that some other time, right? Like, video games are a threat. You're going to rot your brain. You're sitting in one place, blah, 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 right? And there is some merit to that, right? You know, there is plenty of health evidence saying that sitting in one spot is not good for you. However, there's another overwhelming amount of research that has emerged that is pointing to video games as a potentially really important part of mental health treatment and closing the gap in that care. So COVID was a huge example of this, right? The World Health Organization actually recommended video games as a coping mechanism for having to stay inside. But with that, mental health services requests for those increased a lot. And we saw a gap in what available care is there and what treatment options can be, you know, created at cost-effective and scalable solutions. So video games kind of got pinned as this really tangible, affordable space for mental health care. And this is not just in terms of playing commercial games, right? I'm going online and I'm going to play a game with Doran because we're, you know, pretend it's 2020, we're locked inside, right? But this is also going into healthcare practitioners actually going in and using their science around things like ADHD, PTSD, anxiety, and designing video games that actually work to treat these things. So healthcare literature has shown not just that video games can help with, not just commercial video games can help with, you know, managing these anxieties and these conditions, but there can also be targeted therapies designed through those platforms and spaces for engagement. The other really important aspect is that video games are really, really increasingly being adopted by the education sector at all levels, not just you know, elementary school, not just middle, high school, but also higher education and workforce training programs. So a couple really notable examples of this are there's a group of medical students. So I'm trying to find the actual, yeah. So a study done by Miyoshi Qureshi and Ferdowsen in 2017 highlighted the value of game-based learning in helping medical students prepare for work environments stricken by urban conflict. So they would go into simulations through the platform of video game and have to make decisions about how to triage or approach a situation in a war-stricken environment. And they actually found that the students, their sense of self-efficacy, which I'm about to get into, but their ability to handle those situations, their sense of ability to do that increased, and their sense of uncertainty around being able to do those things decreased. Another really interesting example is that multiple police departments have begun using this as part of active shooter training. So being able to, you know, list the steps and respond. The military has used a lot of military video gamings like Call of Duty to help inspire and stoke engagement and interest. Say, hey, come play this video game. It's real fun. Don't you love playing this video game? Don't you love rocking a round of Call of Duty? Well, then let me get you to sign up for the real thing, right? And what a serious tactic, right? And then there are other forms of education-based games that like Jumpstart, Hooked on Phonics, right? Like really key platforms for young people being able to develop skills. So overall, right, education, health, culture, economics, this is playing a role in how we are developing our future generations, how we are preparing right now, and how we are developing our own skill sets, community infrastructure, and sense of self, right? Okay. So, given all of that, I wanted to kind of give you the connection, the aha moment for me. And this kind of brings us back to climate change. I'm not going to spend a ton of time trying to make a case for climate change existing. It does, it is. It is one of the most pressing threats of our time, and that is scientific consensus. But also, this phenomenon is seen to be emerging, especially in psychological literature, saying that climate anxiety is a growing medical health concern, because people are struggling to cope with the uncertainties and the stresses of climate change. I am one of these people. I used to be kept up at night by the duality of me being afraid of the dark, and also then the fear that my electric pollution consumption was killing off the polar bears on the other side of the planet. Okay, this is at 7 years old, right? So a lot of deep instilled climate anxiety for me. And again, we covered this earlier, but video games are a way of escaping. They're a way of seizing autonomy. They're a way of seizing control. And a lot of evidence shows that video games, educational and commercial, are places that we learn, places that we cope, places that we connect and skill build, etc. So this triggered two big thoughts. Could video games be playing currently, or could play a bigger part in building resilience to climate anxiety? And could it also help us be coming up with solutions if they are designed like that, right? So this brings us to the idea. I call it idea because part of this talk for me is to workshop it out. And, you know, poor Dr. Craig has listened to me go down 50 rabbit holes. This has gone through a lot of different iterations at this point. But it's a work in progress. So this is where I'm at, and I'd love feedback. I have 3 major research questions, and I'm going to kind of tie those into going around about the theory and how I want to go about the project overall. But I focus in on a specific genre of video games that include survival-based elements. I will explain that in just a moment. But I want to know if people playing these kinds of video games specifically perceive their self-efficacy in facing climate change disasters in the future. So does playing these games give them a sense of, I can loot, scavenge, and survive in The Last of Us? Does this mean I can loot, scavenge, and survive if, you know, another global pandemic collapses society, right? Second, how do people who play survival-based video games think about climate change? Are they thinking about climate change? Is there an element to playing these games that makes them want to take a pragmatic approach or a problem-solving approach? I don't know. I'm curious to find out. And 3, how do video games function implicitly or explicitly as a way to cope or negotiate climate anxiety? So again, this is getting back to that idea of like research shows us that video games have and can hold these, you know, educational roles and all of this potential. So does that give us another venue if we choose to, you know, accept the mission, seize control, you know, want to develop games that help us with these? So I have 4 guiding theories. And this is me bringing the theory amount down significantly. Self-efficacy, uses and gratifications, escapism, and self-determination. Self-efficacy I wish Dr. Maybach was here because every time I talk about self-efficacy, I can't help but think of him. Was introduced by Bandura, but what the theory really gets at is, or sorry, what self-efficacy is an individual's belief in their ability to perform behaviors as necessary to reach their specific goals. So I've kind of tried to give us some examples to grab onto because I'm an example person. Marshall thinks he can survive the apocalypse because he beat The Last of Us so quickly, right? So is my ability to play these games with a lot of success potentially giving me a sense of ability to translate those skills to the real world? And I really want to emphasize we're talking about perception and not actual, right? I don't want to try and get at, does hunting deer in, Horizon Zero Dawn, is that going to make me proficient at hunting deer out in the real world? I'm not interested in that. I want to know if it makes people think they can, though. Uses and gratifications. This is talking about how people make media choices in accordance with what their needs are, what their tech, info, emotional, stimulation, etc. needs are. So, right, I should have put Ayushi's name in here, but Jane plays Animal Crossing to unwind after work, right? Ayushi goes home and is like, I am tired. I need something to help me unwind. Ayushi wants to play Animal Crossing. And why wouldn't you? It's just idyllic and peaceful. And then this really important concept of escapism, which I'm dived into the literature right now. That is the rabbit hole I am currently trying to pull myself out of. So less fleshed out here, but this is that idea of wanting to leave or go back to something. And I'm really intrigued by this Stenson et al. That defines it in two operational ways, and that is escapism with motivation to self-expand or to self-suppress. So, Doran, I told you were on here. Here you go. An example of self-expansion would be Doran plays video games with his brothers as a form of self-care. So Doran has a need to connect for community, for self-care, etc. And he's using video games to self-expand, to meet those healthy needs. Versus self-suppression, which is kind of engaging in the more detrimental, stereotypically bad side of video games, right? Doran plays video games nonstop instead of coping with school stress. He doesn't do that. I wish he would do that more, but whatever, right? But this is where you're engaging in that escapism that I think we mostly think of heuristically, right? Of like, I want to completely isolate myself from the world or from whatever it is I don't want to deal with. And then the fourth theory I'm looking at is self-determination. And this talks about what motivates people to people, right? And there are three really important components on here that I want to focus in, one in particular I want to focus in on, but those three components are autonomy, competence, and relatedness, right? So autonomy, how can we control what we do? Competence, how good at it are we? And relatedness, how does this connect to our world, etc., right? So what we do and why we decide to do it is often related to and co-constructed by the environment in which we're in, right? I feel anxious that I can't, single-handedly stop climate change, right? So I'm going to go play Baldur's Gate 3 where I have complete control of my characters and the world, and I can, I haven't actually beaten the game yet because I have been trying to be a good student. But, other games I've beaten, I know I can beat this, I can win, I can survive, I can come out victorious, right? Ayushi has a second dream to sell fish that she cannot at this point, or she does not feel that she can capitalize on right now. So she goes to Animal Crossing and is like, I'm going to sell fish and make money, right? So self-determination, we are the captains of our fate. We are the masters of our soul, right? We control our destiny. And what a seriously perfect and nerdy, adage to pin to self-determination. Like that's very built in to the appeal of video games for a lot of folks. So the study would start with a first part and maybe a second part. But the first part is qualitative interviews. I want to talk to the people playing. I have a lot of assumptions about what I think is going on for people. And yes, I'm drawing from scholarship, but I'm also drawing from my personal experience. And like, I want to say my personal experience is legit, data, but it's only legit so far, right? So I designed this as a two-part study, with the first being the qualitative interviews as an opportunity to gut check my research questions, right? I want to know what's going on in these gaming experiences actively and more subconsciously. So what's going on in the gamer's mind when they're playing? Oh man, I'm opening so many loot boxes this round, or oh man, I've gotten this super rare item in my game, and I want to make sure I, Dorn, to use our zombies example, exfil out of this world before I die and I'm forced to leave my loot behind, right? Are these elements of and conversations of preservation, problem solving, etc., actively taking place? Is someone thinking, oh man, I'm problem solving and I'm working on these skills, I'm becoming adaptable in a time crunch, I'm learning to manage stress actively, or is it just happening and they don't even realize it? I also want to know what's going on in their mind when they're not playing. Are they thinking about playing? Are they thinking, man, climate change is rough, I want to go home and play video games? Like, this will help me better identify what the active role of playing those games is for the individual. And I'd like to take this interview and analyze and code it in Atlas to see if there are any significant findings. It's really hard for me to design a survey follow-up or even tell you what that's going to look like before I've even found the findings from the first part, right? So while I have these hopes and assumptions about being able to find these threads of skill development, self-efficacy, and problem solving through the interviews, I don't have enough data currently to tell you exactly what that survey would look like. But I want to take those findings and see if they scale up, and that would be through the design and dispersal of a survey. So I told you I wanted to do survival-based video games, and here's a little bit more about why. Video games, especially as they have evolved over the last, wow, goodness, 50, 60 years at this point, right? There's a lot of kinds and there's a lot of genres. This is not unlike any other form of popular culture, music, TVs, movies, etc. Science fiction, Westerns, romances, problem solving, mysteries, they're all video game genres as well. The reason I am specifically targeting survival-based video games is because these games tend to have resource and skill-oriented play. So we have to find the ingredients to make, X, Y, and Z potions to be able to survive in this world or enhance my, survivability. I need to level up my ability to fish or to cast spells in order to engage with this world better and move through the environment. These have environmental motifs. I couldn't possibly cover everything in the time we have, so I didn't go too into the environmental motifs aspect, but I want to draw from some of the literature concerning environmental representations in narration in general to see what kinds and what would be potentially worth considering. So I found 3 that I really work with, and those are environment as resource, environment as character or context, and environment as opposition or villain. So this is really kind of getting at the three ways a video game, especially a commercial video game, is still integrating these concepts and motifs without actually saying the words environmental, the environment is dangerous, or you're going to deal with resource scarcity or whatever, right? So these are the games that I have chosen right now. And I can give you some thoughts on why that. One, they cover all major gaming platforms or are available across most. So Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, Switch, some handhelds, but also available on PC. This is The Last of Us, Baldur's Gate 3, The Legend of Zelda, Helldivers 2, No Man's Sky, and Horizon Zero Dawn. This covers a lot of audience types. So we've got games in here like The Last of Us that are considered horror games, where you are, if I'm sure it's deeply more popular than it was if I had done this study or decided to talk about the study a year or two ago. But The Last of Us being a world in which mushrooms, to put this very, very boil it down in probably oversimplified terms, a mushroom apocalypse has made mushroom zombies, right? And we have to survive the zombies and get person from point A to point B and deal with humanity along the way. Right? So that's one kind of audience. These are not kids. These are not people who don't want to get engaged with horror. These are people who are fine and comfortable. They are not always the same audience as, say, Animal Crossing or The Legend of Zelda. So The Legend of Zelda, totally different system, totally different vibe, a lot less scary, a lot more friendly, more neutral visually. Baldur's Gate 3, you're getting into some more tabletop diverse gaming types. And then Baldur's Gate and Helldivers both allow for multiplayer online engagement as well. So this is also getting at survival-based games that have a community element versus individual survival-based games too. No Man's Sky is also one that was recommended to me. I have it on this list, but that is dealing with more space-oriented environments, and I was curious through that. I'm still kind of thinking this through of like what space would actually be like, and if there's a difference between engaging on a planet surface or if you're in space and you feel less, adherence to respect because it's not finite as much as we, conceptualize it. And then Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a sort of post-environmental apocalypse where machines have integrated into the landscape, and you've got half robot, half like animal cyborg beings, and it's kind of got a survivalist, prehistoric-ish vibe to it, but also still very modern. Again, a lot of different games though. And so in order to get a sample size that would meet across multiple thresholds, I wanted to increase the likelihood of my sample being diverse by increasing the kind of games that are being examined, but still grounding it in it. Hey, there's a survival element. The environment isn't being engaged either as a resource, as a threat, or as a backdrop or important context to the story. If you have recommendations, I am all for it. This is just where I'm at currently. So with that, I will just say that's where I'm at with the study right now. I'm still working on it. My sense in general, just to go back to the research questions, this is important for finding other ways for us to engage with climate change. This is important for finding out ways for us to not engage with climate change. To me, anxiety, my climate anxiety is really what has grounded me in thinking through about how I engage with pop culture as as something to help me deal with it, but as something to help me escape from it. And because we see sort of video games as not just a symptom of pop culture, but a space in which we can see how society's engaging, I think this is a really interesting place for communication research to be getting done as well. So with that, I want to expand also into looking at the role of commercial gamings, which are being consumed by more people as opposed to educational based games, which either are very, very niche for age groups like Jumpstart, Type to Learn. Loved those back in the day. Helped me learn my phonics, etc., and typing. Versus some of the environmental educational games, which I didn't get a chance to touch on either. But those are games like John Cook's The Cranky Uncle, which is designed to fight climate misinformation. There have been series of games co-collaborated on by universities and services like the National Park Foundation, etc., as efforts to stoke engagements with issues in science and environment. So those are well and good. We know those are designed to, precipitate engagement, but they're not what everyone's playing. I want to know what people who are playing these games every day, or, at the mass population, or mass element of pop culture, I want to know how those games that have the reach and scope and expanse that they do, how are those games potentially an avenue for us to consider other ways to engage with science and the environment and our futures, but also ourselves, right? So with that, thank you. Here's your loot box. Congratulations. And I'm open the floor for discussion of anything video game related or not, but if you have questions, feedback, answers also, don't be afraid to reach out and email me also after this event closes. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing for a second. Oh, Dr. Meltzer, I should have included you. I didn't realize you were a Zelda fan. I'm so shocked because I feel like this has also been the semester where I've taken this idea to a couple other professors, and that's how I found out they also video game, like Dr. Gibson. I've been just, it's an exciting, again, way to community build, right? I think a lot of it's even something that I would have never guessed Doran played video games. I don't think I would have guessed that Dr. Meltzer, you played video games, or even Dr. Craig. I think there's just this assuming of like, we're academics, right? Academic is our personality. We sleep on a bed of books and close our eyes with Foucault over them at night. But, video games is too far out. But I think this project has also been exciting for me in terms of recreating some of those, self-determination or uses and gratifications needs of like, I'm finding community. I am finding other ways to engage. I am meeting my own social and cognitive and autonomy-based needs as well, just in looking at this topic as well. So thought that was interesting. Doran, go ahead.
I'm gonna do that thing where someone makes a comment and like adds whole bunches of work that you should be thinking about.
Love
Um,
it.
so you talked about self-efficacy and video games, and I guess I will admit I never feel particularly more capable, sitting around and playing, Call of Duty doesn't make me feel like I'm more capable of going out and shooting zombies like that. There are other things that I could do that would make me feel more capable of that. But I wonder to what extent you've thought about including something like priming theory and whether or not playing video games increases the horizons of possible solutions. Like how does the video games that the options that exist in video games inform our solutionscape and what we might think about as possible options? And that may be a really interesting thing to tie into sort of the different adventure survival video games that you're looking at is how do the different options, if Baldur's Gate, for example, you can talk like you could handle most of those situations either by going through and murder hoboing, or you can talk your way through. And so how does that solution scape transfer from the video game space to real life in a way that maybe self-efficacy doesn't? I don't necessarily feel like I'm more capable of going and hacking people with a sword because I played Baldur's Gate, but does it inform the range of solutions that I think about? And especially when we think about environmental options, if we were to build the perfect game for communicating about environment, is one of the things that we'd need to think about the range of solutions possible and how does that video game element lay out into the real world. So I guess more things for you to think about there.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I am intrigued by this idea of priming now. Because I'm wondering if it's also for some folks, priming plus self-efficacy development. And I will admit, part of this was deeply inspired by me growing up with a group of guy friends I also gamed with, and them saying goofy things while we were playing of like, oh man, if we were in real life, I would be fine. You all would be, I got this, right? Or even an interaction with one of my friends who has a young child. He's not really at the video game stage playing, like he's not playing like mission driven games yet, but he likes to go on and interact with the environment, etc. And he took up like farming or mining or something in one of the games he was messing around with. And then he went outside and was like, oh, I can do those things. I can recreate those skills outside. And those are really, you know, to some degree, right? Like I'm thinking that through that, and I'm like, that's the priming effect too, because if it hadn't even occurred to them that it was an option before playing the game, that's probably important as well. But I also drew into, and this gets a little bit more expanded in the actual write-up I'm doing with this for Dr. Craig that I'll have to you on Monday. And that's this idea that like citizen science, right? Or the online spaces, geocaching and is a really interesting example. And then there's other kinds of citizen science programs online where people are mining data online as a game and is producing real science results too. And we've seen these things with COVID. We've seen these examples play out with wildlife species spotting. So looking for endangered creatures. People are like looking at pictures of wildlife online and doing deep examinations, right? And so like this whole aspect and idea of gamification as well is really important. But part of the drive to do the video game versus movies and TVs, which I also wanted to spend more time on, debating on how much time to put to each sub thread of this was hard for me. But the tactile physical nature of playing and engaging with games. So you're not, versus sitting and watching TV, you're less physically engaged in the same, well, I don't want to say less engaged, you're engaged differently, right? So you're using your hands and there's different brain processes happening. And so drawing off of that, Lauren, I think primacy plus self-efficacy plus these virtual spaces, that might even actually be more refined in terms of thinking through operationally what's going on too. Oh, Dr. Craig, go ahead.
To that point, one, I'll just joke off of what you were saying in terms of having those goofy friends. I mean, isn't that many of us that play online? That was me, I would. And it just makes me think of, I almost got the names mixed up, but the Johari window, where it's like that blind spot in our lives and our existence, where we don't know ourselves until we go into having that experience. But to your point, we think we have some idea through these games that we play, or we challenge and think, oh, I'd survive okay. To Doran's point, I don't necessarily know I'd be able to hack somebody up, but I think I'd be able to live, beyond a year if I had too many of these types of survival incidences. But I also want to go back to what you were describing in the sense of the economics of the video game industry. You know, when you look at that caliber of money, of revenue that's generated, it also speaks to what we've talked about in regards to pop culture. A big part of it is leisure. The changing way that we live leads to us being able to have leisure time as we moved into the industrial economy and further move into like the technological economy. And so that means that, we have this space of time that we want to do something that this leads me into one of your theoretical spaces, escapism. We escape from, but we also escape to. So, to your point, we have leisure money. So what are we escaping from? And then why are we escaping to it? I think is what you're also relevant in regards to why we select the games that we do, part of that UNG space that you're talking to.
Yeah, and I know that we pretty much have spent an entire class period or discussion talking just about escapism, but I think what I'm not seeing in the literature and what I am also kind of interested to tease out to see if it's even possible for me to do is to expand the literature in a way where we're looking at multiple acts of escapism at once. So not it just being unilateral or unidirectional, but multi-directional escapism, right? I am escaping, the fact that I can't do anything with climate change by playing The Sims, where I can control the entire environment. But I'm also escaping while I'm playing The Sims. I'm making other escapism based decisions too. Like I want to be a musician, right? So I'm escaping to that alternate reality or career choice, or I'm escaping to, and I think this ties into different accessibility and more critical discussions with video games, but as spaces to negotiate identity. So like being able to mess with gender, race, background, ability. When any game you can create an avatar, you are creating an opportunity to try a different persona existence on. And speaking as a non-binary person, that's really, I was going to say healing. It's a really complicated space in terms of like being able to engage with some of those internal things as well that you can't physically escape from in a lot of respects. So video games is a space for not just escaping from external stuff, but escaping from internal stuff or negotiating it. And then also through that economic lens, looking at how you're escaping to or from systems of power. So not just within games, like in Baldur's Gate, there are definitely races of beings that you can be that are less respected, or you feel like you're interacting with racism if you're a certain kind of character. I think like my tiefling is having a lot of interesting interactions, and I was like, not sure what you called me, but I'm pretty sure it was a slur, right? And like it's a different way of engaging with the world, but these are also interactions, identity-based interactions that wouldn't necessarily be experienced otherwise, right? So, but also like we're using video games because we can't fix the system and political reality we're living in, right? So again, really interesting ideas of that concept and like how it's playing out, not just in the individual internal, but scaling all the way up to the systemic. So Dr. Meltzer, I saw you had your hands up. I didn't mean to pass over you.
I just posted in the chat what I was trying to remember which study it was. No, just first of all, thank you. I'm so happy I was able to attend your presentation. I think the research is so important and fascinating. It just, reminded me of some things that I've, taught, used for teaching and have read, myself before, that I'm sure you've probably already come across, and your professors who are experts in this area would direct you to.
Yeah, I was definitely had a funny moment while I was doing some research in looking at frameworks for looking at video game based engagement. And I stumbled across one that was co-authored by, the first author was, I think, Swedish. And then I look a few authors down, and there's Dr. Mayback. And I was like, he found his way to the video game sector as well. Like, that's quite an accomplishment. But just, it was all on also looking at, what qualifies as an educational game. And like, how is it, like, how can we create measures for assessing its impact? He truly is everywhere. He says stand on the shoulders of giants all the time, and I'm like, you might not realize you're the tallest man in the room sometimes. I really keep finding him in different research spaces, but again, that really interesting also potential for collaboration, I think, is important. And as we have, Ayushi, Dr. Craig and I have been working on this lab for, gosh, a little over a year now. We've been wanting to figure out foundationally what's important to us and what values we really want the lab to push. And part of that has been looking at interdisciplinary spaces or places for engagement through collaboration. And, just looking at some of the educational video games that exist now, but also some of the ones that have stoked accidental collaborations. This is a space in which we can be getting, health practitioners in the room and video game designers in the room and artists and composition majors and say, all right, we have a mission here. We want to create a game that inspires people to engage with the world or this concept or this problem in X way, right? So what trying to sell my parents on this idea of video games as being a site too has been interesting. But when I say, what if we could negotiate health outcomes at a public health level? What if we could be engaging with helping teach, tough political concepts or having social conversations? Because we see conversations about social issues taking place in video games all the time, and how the reactions to those things also incite broader external engagement and discussion as well. So I think we also historically, and I'm an English major, so I'm all about the narration, being a key and site for meaning making. But I think video games are also a form of pop culture and a place for text that often doesn't get as much research or attention as, say, film, TV, books, etc. And I'm not sure if that's a product of time, like it's still newer in terms of pop culture artifacts or what, but it's definitely, as we move through and we're seeing the spaces between engagement with the physical world, engagement with the tech world collapsing in a lot of ways, those boundaries, especially with AI, I think looking to video games or virtual spaces that we are having these sorts of interactions is going to be increasingly important as we move through the future too. So go ahead, Dr. Craig.
I was going to comment, you triggered a thought that I made a note of, but this is coming off of that. You mentioned how in 1958, the tic-tac-toe game was meant to like encourage people to not fear computers and the incoming technology. We're still at that same space 67, 68 years later, where people have apprehensions of AI and computer technology. And so gaming in some way is meant to alleviate those fears. So when we talk virtual reality spaces and the VR sets, but I also want to go into, I think you have another Bandura theory that you could potentially pull from or play with in social learning. Because you mentioned Bandura and self-efficacy, but I think you overlooked the idea of social learning and how these games play into that. And as I was listening to you, one of the things that I began to question is like, what are we learning through these games? When I think about some of the things people are actively engaging, especially in the idea of violence, retribution, sexualization, or other things, but it just made me wonder, what are we learning? And I think I've mentioned the movie to you before, but I encourage you to check it out. It's Robin Williams. It's the movie Toys. He and Joan Cusack plays his sister. If you haven't seen it, I think it's an awesome challenge to society before gaming really took off the way it has, in regards to if we are not careful, we're going to go in a direction in which we have kids like you were saying, playing these games, sitting in spaces, but not only doing it, playing violent games that are military oriented. And it shows the demonstration of the hybridization of creating kids that are playing these violent games. And basically what we're doing now with like navigation of drones and active warfare, things of that nature, without actual real consequence of the world that we live in. So when you talked about, and I think we talked about this before, the military did used to come. I haven't seen them in a while on campus, but they used to have these simulations, flight simulators, encouraging students to come in and check them out, things of that nature.
Yeah, so a few things. Thank you. That was one of the theories that really, there are a lot of theories. And I think we talked about this in terms of like, I think the 4 that I presented are kind of my big 4 capital T theories. And then I have a lot of smaller T theories that are making appearances here and there. And the role of consequences is one I'm still teasing out the extent, because it is such a huge part in terms of like the gaming experience, but also the physical world experience and, interactions, not just from the, if I only have $100 and I go out and buy the $60 game, like what are the consequences of that? Or what if the internet goes out and my console that is now only internet based, like, is that not going to work anymore? Like the way we can see consequences negotiated through this interaction is overwhelming a little bit, if I'm honest, but that's why I'm going to take the summer and keep working on it. But also to the extent that, it's interesting in the way it might, when I'm thinking about what Doran said about primacy as well, create false expectations, right? Because of that lack of consequences in some way. In certain ways, you're protecting yourself from consequences when you're doing things like what my title is inspired by, scumming, right? But you can't do that in the real world necessarily. You can't set up X, Y, and Z precautions. So that the fact that you lose that element of like, I don't want to say, I'm careful to not say not harmful impacts or loss of like physical harm impacts, because I think somehow somewhere there's going to be a citation that says this is causing psychological harm or something when you lose a game. I don't know. But what I am saying is, if it's giving us false expectations about how achievable or doable or how it dulls our sense of what violence is or whatever, that is also important to note. The social learning theory is also interesting to me in the video game chat space, in terms of like when I'm playing online, and I oftentimes will not turn on my microphone, or I'll mute the lobby chat now, because growing up as someone who played video games before we had more conversations about gender equality, etc., video games online were not the most friendly spaces for people who were not cis men, right? And not even to cis men, but that's another conversation. But like the things they'll talk about, right? People are like, I heard 2 people on opposite sides of the country the other week having a conversation about social and current events. And they were going back and forth between matches, like having these serious conversations. And then they'd be like, okay, time to play around. We'd be on opposite teams, so they, can't chat. But then, like, again, that goes into that social learning theory of like, how is information also being spread, and how is it impacting, communication environments that have to do with transmission of information? I don't know. I didn't, fact check them on certain things, because I was mostly just being nosy and kind of curious. But that is absolutely an environment where people are still learning from and engaging with each other as well, and developing understandings and perceptions of the world. Doran, I don't want to deny you.
No, it's I was sort of, I have a couple of more thoughts, and I suspect I will have more and more thoughts over time. But
Welcome.
I think we do learn about violence in the game, but I think there are also opportunities to learn about other things. I keep There was actually a really interesting presentation at ECA on video games, and they were talking about the presenter was talking about using video games to help international students sort of acclimate to the US. And one of the questions that I threw out is, what if we used video games for non-international students to get the experience of at least a little bit of being international? And I think one of the real interesting powers and promises of video games is that you can embody a different set of experiences. It's, if I go into Baldur's Gate and play a tiefling, like that's a different experience in terms of I've spent my life as a cis white dude. And if I play a character and I am trying to embody that character in a video game, do I learn about different levels of privilege and experience by being that character? I think there's also a different set of you may want to look into sort of the simulation realm. I know that it's not video games, but like from my international relations experience, there's a lot of simulation work that may have research and theories that could be useful for you. And then sort of a final thought as you pull open this State Department thing. But I think, and it's sort of back to the priming and solutionscape, how we design video games becomes important. My little brother, there was an educational game called Third World Farmer that my little brother played for a little while. And he broke it. The whole idea is that you try and make decisions about your crops, and what he figured out, and you try and bring in enough money for the next year. And my little brother at the age of like 5 or 6 was playing the game, and he realized that the best thing he could do was have as many daughters as possible and marry them off for the dowry. Because the game logic, he made way more money doing that than planting any of the crops. And so, yeah, I know. And so it's interesting to think about how we build in the logic and the rules of video games and how that informs the solutionscape, and what are the implications of that, from a game design side on how we normalize certain things in the game. If having as many daughters as possible to get the dowries is how you get the highest score, and he got a higher score than I certainly could have done. And that's, I think it's worth thinking about and incorporating in.
I'm still wrapping my head around that a little bit, because I used to love like Roller Coaster Tycoon and other like simulation games where, you get to like control infrastructure design and see how that works and doesn't work. I think every person who's played The Sims or Roller Coaster Tycoon has either removed the ladder from a sim pool while the sim was in the pool and made them swim forever, or you like edit the roller coaster while it's being run, and just to see if like the carts go flying off the roller coaster track. And like, it's, again, it kind of ties back into that, how we start developing a sense of consequences. But also your example paints a particularly interesting situation for how we start to conceptualize interactions with power and people as well. I also, like, I can't deny, Dorn is the one who sent me this article. I was asking him if he like had any video game media sites that he found interesting, and he sent me this, and I was kind of thinking through this while you were talking about your international relations situation. And it's like, yes, I think there's a lot of evidence for video games being violent and acculturating us to violences that we often experience only through video games, and not, especially in the United States, as a firsthand effect. Because a lot of these things, how they represent other places, how they're designed heuristically, also create representations or assumptions about other places and other spaces and other people. But it's also interesting potential to me then that, or let me say that more succinctly. If that's true, then it also, to me, becomes true that they can be sites for us to do things like learn diplomacy. right? For us to play test how conversations and consequences work in that environment where no consequences, you can go in, play the game, and come out, and it's actually you haven't had to deal with the real world implications of offending someone or accidentally causing World War III, but you've learned how to not do that as well. And so kind of looking at the way games can structure those options as well is important. But the other thing I wanted to say that I was thinking about was the bad rap that video games with violence has. And I think especially growing up in this generation where school violence and school shootings have been a public health problem, it's important to also ground this in the fact that some of the stereotypes that pervade, myths about video game playing, particularly violent video games, don't actually end up holding up. And in fact, there's a sufficient amount of research, or an impressive amount. I don't want to ever say any amount of research is sufficient, because there's always more to be done, but indicating that people who are playing video games that have violence are also like dealing with their hard feelings and not having, like, it's translating into social emotional wellness rather than them actually going out and saying, oh, well, I just went into this Call of Duty match and had the best, kill death ratio in my team. That's not translating into people going into public spaces and committing acts of violence. And not to say that that's what you were getting at, Dr. Craig, but I think that's like one of those things where when I think about barriers to video games being considered a legitimate site of research too, I also think that it goes into those video games are destroying your brain. Video games are making you violent and dumb and going to mean you don't have any friends, right? And some of those things is research has shown that it's often leading to increased socialization. People who struggle in public social spaces are now able to make friends in virtual social spaces. People who struggle with engaging in other ways physically as well, like people who can't play with their legs, they can't go outside and run or something, they can get on and play video games. Even folks who don't have use of arms or legs or whatever, they've designed video games to accommodate literally everyone. I know The Last of Us, and I'm particularly a fan of that, as people who come to the pop culture know I bring it up at least once a speaker seminar. But they have it designed so people who are colorblind can play. They have it designed so people who have eye movement video game assisted controllers. So I'm not fully sure how to explain the technology of this because it is so sci-fi, but people who are able to use their eye movements or their mouth movements in place of a controller because they don't have use of their hands or their feet, they are able to play that game. So again, it goes back to Doran's point about design being a huge important place of this too, of like, how are these software and computer designers and game designers integrating accessibility? How are they integrating it at, the, can they play this game? It's also at the narration, who are we representing and how are we representing them? And then it's also like, what are the ability to play this game doing for us on the outside when we stop playing it too? If I'm de-stressing, if I'm, really mad from a day of middle school, as I often was, I come home all huffy and puffy because, my middle school bully was named Joey, but Joey would just give me a hard time on the playground all day. And I'd jump in and I'd play some Kingdom Hearts. And I'd run around with Goofy, Mickey, and Donald, exploring the power of friendship and defeating the Heartless. And, was I swinging a sword around and you know, shooting bad guys with my laser spaceship? Yes. But was I also coming out of it a little bit more emotionally regulated and feeling like, I'm having a horrible time in middle school, but I am absolutely an awesome superhero in this, you know, space out here? Yes. So it's again like really interesting to navigate how we conceptualize, you know, video games as um both giving us an opportunity to engage with something like violence, but also as a way of doing something like helping us get out of our other experiences of violence elsewhere in the world. It's again, it's such a rich interaction between humans and systems and design and time, that like I feel like we could make a whole branch of pop culture lab just about video game research. And I feel like studies could be done at almost every thread of this that we have talked about. It has been the ultimate challenge of this project has absolutely been trying to put boundaries around how far it goes and how many rabbit holes I run down with it, rather than, you know, I'm not getting enough, where I've had that issue with other projects. There's almost too much here for me to keep exploring. So I will also totally throw out there, because Ayushi, I know your cat is named Link. My cat is named Ellie. And my dog is named Odin, which is not superhero or video game related necessarily, but I love the pop culture pet names. So
Well, I was gonna add from the list of games that you had selected. If you need two participants, I have my brother and my husband who will, they don't know this yet, but they will willingly participate because they play probably almost all of those games, and I'm sure they'll have some insight to share if you would like participants. So I'm volunteering them for your study. But something that I think as you were, I made this connection as you were presenting, where I realized that I play games with a very interesting goal, which is very different from like my brother, who we grew up in the same house. But our identities are obviously, we've developed differently in terms of how we manage our identities. And I think some of the experiences we had growing up impact how we play those games. So like, for example, you know, talking about just paying off my debts in Animal Crossing, coming from a space where growing up, you know, I wasn't from a family that was very affluent, or we didn't have a lot of money, or then even being an international student, struggling with money because, you know, I'm paying so much in tuition, made me realize that when I play games, my ultimate goal is always, how can I accrue the most resources and be like the most stable that I can be? So whether it's paying off debts or I used to play that one game, Age of Empires. And I'd always find all the cheat codes, so I had the most resources, so I could sell the most things. So I had the most money at the end, because then I felt powerful. And it made me think about, I never made this connection until I heard you present. So it's very interesting, because it makes me think, how do people approach their identities, or are they cognizant of how their identities impact how they're taking in you know, climate change and these games that they're playing? How is that impacting how they're taking those in, and how are they making sense of it, and how are they communicating that, right, whether it's in the game or outside of the game? And then how are they navigating those resources? Because someone like me, if I don't play any of those games, but I can guarantee you, if I did, I'd probably be the one like hoarding resources because it makes me feel like I'm safe, right? Like that's that is a big part of just who I am. I want to make sure I'm safe and the people around me are safe. So I go into games and I play in that way. But then I look at my brother, and he has a very, like, he plays Legend of Zelda, and my husband does, And I see them both play, and I'm like, you both play this with very different ideals of what you're doing or what you're looking for, right? Or then there's my husband, who we share an island on Animal Crossing. I got grandfathered into his island, so I manage the island. He doesn't even show up anymore. But but what I've noticed is I've gone in and like paid off my whole house, and I'm like trying to make sure I have extra money. So if people come visit my island, I can be like, do you want a friend and family like gift? Here's some money, go back to your island. Like, that's how I'm playing this game. And then my husband he just has all the debt from Uncle Nooks. So it's a very different approach to how we're approaching that. It made me think about, identities and how they might impact how people are playing the games you're thinking about. Also, if you need a coder at some point, let me know. I'm happy to help you code. I'm volunteering, so if you need a coder, I'm here.
I'm like, that, okay, you've just said like multiple things every academic wants to hear. One, I didn't think about this thing until you were saying it. What an ego boost. And two, can I code for you? I'm a little bit speechless. Your comment also in the chat about talking about having an international student tell you that he noticed people in the US were playing differently than people, sorry, if you're not looking at the chat, people in the US play Animal Crossing differently than people in South Korea. And like, also interesting way to see how not only identity is negotiating how you're engaging with the game, or how the game might allow you to negotiate with identities you don't have, but to see how cultural, like sort of beyond the individual, but bigger cultural, identities can impact how you're engaging with those things as well. And I think it goes back to being really interesting of like, all of these things are obviously very co-creational, right? Doran's brother was probably not thinking about at 5 or 6 selling off, having a bunch of daughters and selling them off for dowry to support his, farming empire, right? Like he wasn't thinking about that, but like that's, again, primacy effect is taking place there, right? It's giving him this idea that he didn't have previously. I remember I was stuck in a cave in BG3 and I had like no arrows left that were, super powered arrows. And my partner was like, hey, why don't you throw that bottle of grease and then throw one of your bottles of liquid fire at it and see if it explodes. And it did. And I was like, I hadn't even thought of that as a possibility until, and it was just like these things of like the gaming world can often give you a sense of things that you hadn't even had a concept before, but then also who you are as a person is going to determine in some ways how you go about looking and examining and interacting with that world. My partner, I love her very much, but will take forever. And like she picks up everything in a video game. She loots every nook and cranny of every space. We have gotten kicked out. We've had to fight an entire village multiple times because she accidentally got caught looting stuff. And I'm like, just stop taking things, right? And then she has to go sell all of it. And it's this whole thing, right? But she loves the alchemy aspect. She loves the like economic aspect. She gets a thrill out of looking for things, whereas I want to go, negotiate diplomacy with the drought or whatever, right? I want to do all of these other more active socialization things. And, Ayushi, it's just a different iteration of what you said, right? Like we all come and have different ways of engaging. But I think what also becomes true is video games become a way for us to learn other ways to engage, right? You probably didn't think about your husband and brother playing those video games differently and like thinking of other ways to play video games differently until you saw them. So that goes back to that priming effect too. And in another way, now that we're talking about it, I'm interested in the sort of reproduction of self-efficacy, or the loop necessarily of like, okay, well, seeing someone else do it and be successful like I feel like I can go do that thing and try and be successful in a different way, or seeing someone else do it. Is that social learning theory or a different iteration of social learning theory? Again, so much dense theory that could be applied and explored here. The possibilities are really, really rich. And I'm also worried about your little brother, Doran. I'm just kind of worried about people in general, though. He's hopefully not playing that farming simulation game now. Or if he is, maybe he's figured out how to bring it back to farming, hopefully. So again, really interesting thoughts and ideas. And I'm truly like thrilled that we've had such a rich discussion. I always leave these meetings with like 50 more ideas and about 100 more questions and at least 3 projects that I'm going to write down that I'm definitely going to pursue this summer, but we'll probably have to wait till the future. But if anyone else has any last minute thoughts, feedbacks, I want to be mindful that it is finals week and it is almost 4. So yeah, it is never done. It is just due. I've never heard it put so brilliantly. I am going to put that on a t-shirt or a mug, or maybe just get it tattooed on me. I don't know.
Definitely
Thank you
not
so
my
much for being
words.
here, Dr. Motzer. If you get a quote on that, I'll put the parenthetical citation with it.
I think it's been passed down through lineages of mentors. My mentor told me, and her mentor told her. I'm pretty sure her mentor's mentor told her. So we're just passing wisdom down.
I love academic lineages. They're so fascinating to me too. Talk about another place of communication to research. Folk knowledge, don't even get me started, Doran. I will. This Zoom can't handle it. Neither can my brain. It's already kind of smoldering. Oh, the tech glitch.
Nicely done.
There you go.
Great conversation.
Awesome.
With that, we bring our year to a close for Pop Culture Ideas. And just as a heads up for Dr. Meltzer and for Doran, we will have a link that will go live next year for Pop Culture Ideas. And one of the things that we're going to do is make sure that all of our speaker series, the videos, are put in a repository so you'll be able to access them, any of the topics and speakers that you may be interested in. So keep an eye out for that coming in the announcement at the beginning of the next academic year when it's live.
Yes, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Pop Ideas Lab GMU.
All right, everybody, have a great weekend. Good luck.
Hang in there, everyone. See you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.